Pretty intense story, isn't it? Shane wonders why I hate Christmas. Can I just say I don't hate Christmas? That's like a vicious rumour. We're going to hear we're going to spend Christmas with Matthew tonight, and next week we're going to thank you, Matthew. And next week we're spending Christmas with Luke, and Mark doesn't really have a birth story unless the entire thing is the birth of the church. Anyway, let's go with Matthew. Matthew tells the story of two kings. The first king was Herod the Great. Herod was a king who should not have been a king, and he knew it. He knew that he had no valid claim to the throne that he was on. In fact, the only reason he rose to power was because his dad was friends with Julius Caesar. This is how he ended up as king. About 40 years before Jesus was born, the Roman Senate appointed Herod king of Judea, that is, king of the Jews. In some ways, poor Herod, although I don't know whether we should have too much sympathy for him, as you'll see in a minute, he was a bit between a rock and a hard place. He didn't really have autonomous rule. He was a puppet of the Roman Empire, and he knew the Romans would squash him like a bug if he caused any trouble. On the other hand, the Jewish people that he ruled didn't much care for him because he wasn't actually a Jew. He was raised a Jew, but his father was from Edom. He was an Edomian. And Edom was one of the traditional enemies of Israel. So the people that he ruled saw him as a bit of an interloper and a pretender to the throne. Now, put yourself in Herod's shoes. Can you imagine what that might do to your mental health? At the time he was appointed king, Herod had a wife who wasn't Jewish and a young son. When he was declared king, he banished them and he married a Jewish woman from an elite Jewish family. Why did he do that? Well, to try and kind of curry favour with the people that he ruled. This is the sort of person he was. He was scheming and he was ruthless. And he was utterly paranoid. He was deeply afraid of being usurped as the king. He reportedly loved his Jewish wife, Mariamne, loved her with a passion, but he got suspicious that she was going to challenge his kingship. As I said, she was from a very elite Jewish family. And so he had her murdered. And he then had their two sons murdered, and her brother, and her mother, and her grandfather, just to be sure that there was no one left who could challenge his rule. In fact, Emperor Augustus reportedly said, "It is better to be a pig in the household of Herod than a son." Because, of course, Herod wouldn't kill a pig because he followed Jewish dietary laws. But he didn't have any problem killing his sons. Herod had a bodyguard of 2,000 soldiers. He built great fortresses out in the countryside just in case there was an insurrection and he might have to flee to a safe place. He was so concerned that no one would mourn his death that when he realised he was close to death, he had a large group of distinguished men from every Judean village rounded up. He locked them in the hippodrome with instructions that they be killed on his death so that Judea would be filled with displays of grief when he died. So that's the first king. And then there's this baby. he did not have 2,000 bodyguards. He had a teenage mother, maybe 13 or 14, and a young partner, her young partner, who knew that this baby was not his. But Matthew says that this baby was the coming king that his people foretold long ago. That this baby was part of some unfolding plan. Could there be a stronger contrast between these two kings? And it seems like everything that we've heard tonight in Matthew's story highlights just how precarious this plan of God's is, how risky it was, because there are so many things that could have gone wrong. In chapter 1, we find out that Joseph, on hearing that Mary was pregnant, decided to break off the engagement. What if he had? What if he'd just walked away like any respectable Jewish man in the first century? There was one thing that stood between his decision to walk away and a decision to stay. A dream. Not a vision, not a choir of angels, not an email from God, just a dream. An angel speaks to Joseph in a dream and suggests that he should stay. What if Joseph, like most sane individuals, had not made a major life decision on the basis of a dream? Would have been down to one 14-year-old mother with no support from Centrelink and possibly estranged from her family. One young teenage girl was all the protection that this baby had. And what about these mad magi? The not-so-wise men, I like to call them. Knowing what we do now about Herod, now when we read this section, we're freaking out. We watch these guys decide to go where? Jerusalem, where Herod is. And we want to scream at them, oh my God, don't go to Jerusalem, Herod's there. Go to Bethlehem, the baby's in Bethlehem. Stay away from Jerusalem. But no, they just wander into Jerusalem. Any king? Is there a king? We heard there was a new king born. This is right under Herod's nose. Just shut up. Can you feel Herod's paranoia beginning to ramp up as he hears this? Imagine the terror that he is feeling, that maybe there's a rival king out there. He's terrified of losing his power. If he finds this kid, it's all over. Herod gets his experts together who point to Bethlehem as a probable location for this foretold king. And Herod invites the Magi to a private meeting to get as much information as he can out of them. And he fools them into thinking, it seems like it doesn't take that much to fool these not-so-wise men, he fools them into thinking that he's pleased a new king has been born. Look, when you find him, can you let me know? I'd like to go visit him myself. Oh, sure, they say. Can you feel the tension rising in this story? Can you hear the suspense music? It's just playing in the background there. It's starting to get a little louder because they're going to lead him to the baby. They find the baby, they worship him, and then there's another dream. Warning not to go back to Herod. Again, nothing but a dream stands between this little baby and Herod's ruthless paranoia. The Magi return via a different route. And you and I, dear reader, dear listener, can breathe a sigh of relief. He's safe for the time being. Crisis narrowly averted, yet again. But can you still hear the suspense music? It's still there. It's still playing in the background. And as the camera pans back to Herod, it starts getting louder. Because Herod has figured out that he's been betrayed by the Magi, and he is incensed, exceedingly angry. He is furious. He is enraged. This man that thought nothing of killing his wife and his children, not to mention all those other relatives, he wants to eliminate this threat to his reign, and he will do it. He is not about to give up. It's not about putting this in the too hard basket. He sends soldiers to Bethlehem to kill the baby. How will they know which baby is this newborn threat? Well, they won't. Kill a lot of them. Kill all the children in Bethlehem under 2 years of age. Let none escape. The brutality of this man is beyond comprehension. The soldiers are marching towards Bethlehem. But Matthew, maybe he's worried that the suspense is just building a little too much. He lets us in on a little secret. Joseph, Mary, and the baby, they've already gone. They've fled to take refuge in a land far away. Once more, an angel in a dream shows up and warns them to flee. Once more, Joseph, taking notice of the dream, is all that stands between the baby and a brutal death. Pleased he took notice of his dream. When the soldiers burst in, the crib is empty and the baby's gone, escaped by the skin of his teeth. You can relax now. Spoiler alert, they stay away until Herod dies. When this baby grows up, he'll meet Herod Jr., but that's another story. Some historians say that there's no evidence outside of Matthew's story that the slaughter of the innocent children actually happened. Luke doesn't mention it in his birth narrative. The Jewish historian Josephus doesn't mention it. But from what we know of Herod elsewhere, it certainly sounds like something that he would do. He was ruthless, merciless, abusive. He was a scheming king. When you read it, if you know a lot of Bible stuff, did you notice that there's a lot of parallels between Matthew's birth narrative and the Exodus story in the Old Testament? If you know the story of Moses, you'll know there's a ruthless king in that story as well, the Egyptian Pharaoh, who oppresses God's people and makes their lives miserable. And in spite of this, their population keeps increasing until the king becomes worried that they're becoming so numerous that they're going to be a threat to his power. And so he orders his soldiers to go through the villages and kill the baby boys by throwing them into the river. But one baby escapes. His mother puts him in a waterproof basket and places him in the river. And he's rescued by the daughter of the very king who's trying to kill him. This baby grows up to be the deliverer of God's people. It seems like Matthew tells his story in such a way as to recall to mind that earlier story, a story of a powerful but ruthless king and a vulnerable child who has very little protection, but who grows up to rescue his people. But Matthew's story has a twist. Matthew says that this vulnerable baby is Emmanuel, God with us. That this baby that lies so helplessly at the very heart of Matthew's story, the one that all this frantic activity is revolving around while he just lies there, is somehow God. Somehow God resides in this helpless babe. Somehow God is embodied in this infant. It's God who's placed themselves in this tenuous situation. Jesus Christ, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a baby, a small and fragile baby. What kind of God entrusts themselves to a 13-year-old girl? What kind of God comes up with a plan that success depends on a young man taking notice of a dream? What kind of God would come up with a precarious plan like that? A God who risked everything. A God who risked being vulnerable. I looked up vulnerable. It means leaving yourself open to harm or danger, risking misunderstanding. Don't often think of God in those terms, do we? Vulnerable. A vulnerable God. See, vulnerability isn't the same as weakness. I think Brene Brown's research has shown us that. She's shown that vulnerability is actually a strength. My thesaurus says that the opposite to being vulnerable is to be impervious, untouchable, immune, hard. That's not the sort of king that we have. That's not the sort of God that we have. Our God came to us not as a Herod, a ruthless king wielding power in order to control and suppressing resistance with brutality. Our God came as an infant in a precarious situation, prepared to risk all to save their people. It's very tempting, isn't it, to trust in the powerful ones, the ones who wield the sword to get what they want, the ones who step on people to get to their goals. We can think of people like that. They're in the news every day. So this Advent season, can we remember it's the vulnerable king who grew up to save his people? Let's reflect on that in this Advent season.